Myth: a person needs papers to be legally separated in North Carolina. Contrary to popular belief, in North Carolina, in order to be legally separated, spouses simply need to live in separate residences with the intent of at least one of them that the separation be permanent. There is no requirement that a document be signed that declares the spouse is separated. However, living in separate rooms of the same house or even in separate sides of the same duplex is not sufficient. The parties must live under separate roofs.
Myth: if you want to separate from your spouse, just leave. There are a couple of reasons that a spouse should not just leave the residence if she decides she wants a separation. The first reason is abandonment. Abandonment is a form of marital misconduct and occurs when one spouse brings the marital cohabitation to an end without justification, without consent, and without the intention of renewing the marital relationship. In most cases, judges understand that in order for a couple to be separated, someone has to leave the residence. Thus, the issue of abandonment is not really that big of a deal. The only form of marital misconduct that will bar a dependent spouse from receiving alimony is adultery. However, how abandonment may affect your case is very fact-specific, so you may wish to consult with a lawyer before deciding to separate. Another reason you shouldn't just leave the marital residence is that if you move out of the house, you may not be able to get back in. If you make the decision to move from the marital residence and actually leave the house with your things, you may not go back to the marital residence without the permission of your spouse. If you return to the residence without your spouse's permission, or refuse to leave after he or she asks you to do so, your spouse may call the police, and you may face charges of domestic criminal trespass.
Myth: you don't need a lawyer. Even in the most amicable divorce situations, it is always a good idea to consult with a lawyer to make sure you're educated about your rights and responsibilities. In addition, while it may be tempting to draft your own legal documents, it's always advisable to have a lawyer at least review them before you sign them to ensure you're not missing any material terms. Myth: most cases go to court. There are two ways to resolve the issues arising from a separation: in court or out of court. We always encourage our clients to settle their cases if possible. It's more cost-effective and less taxing from an emotional standpoint. Even after litigation has commenced, it's still possible to resolve your case, and most cases do settle at some point during the process. However, it takes cooperation and a willingness to be transparent and meet in the middle, and without either of these elements, court may be the only option.
Myth: during the separation, your spouse is required to continue paying the bills. As a family law practitioner, one of the most often asked questions that I hear is, now that we're separated, does my spouse have to keep paying the bills? More times than not, the person who asks me the question is frustrated with my answer, which is that until there is a court order or formal agreement in place, there is no requirement that your spouse continue to pay all of the household bills. Oftentimes, married couples are living very close to or even beyond their financial means. Just because a spouse enjoyed a certain standard of living during the marriage does not mean that he or she will be able to continue to live at that same standard following separation. With another residence comes another set of household bills and expenses, and there simply may not be enough money to go around. In such cases, a dependent spouse may not receive alimony that is sufficient to meet his or her expenses at the same level that existed during the marriage. The supporting spouse may not have adequate income to pay those expenses, as well as his or her own living expenses. Accordingly, for a spouse who has traditionally stayed at home, a separation may mean that he or she will ultimately need to rejoin the workforce.